I remember the smell of sage and onions more clearly than the sound of the crash. That may seem strange, but when you reach my age, 72, with bones that creak like old floorboards, your mind clings to the ordinary things. The familiar comforts. I had roasted the turkey the night before, slow and careful, just as my late husband Harold liked it. I wrapped it tight, nestled it into the cooler, and packed the car before dawn. Thanksgiving was always at my son Daniel's house now. He said my place was too small for everyone, though it had held birthdays, funerals, and 30 years of laughter just fine. The morning air was cold, sharp enough to wake me fully. I drove slowly, both hands on the wheel, humming along to the radio. I had knitted a scarf for my daughter-in-law, Melissa. Soft gray, neutral, safe. She preferred safe things. People like Melissa always did. I was 10 minutes from the highway when the world tilted. A truck ran a red light. I saw its grille for half a second. Too close, too fast. Then came the sound. Metal screaming. Glass shattering. My body lurched forward, then sideways, then everything went dark. When I woke, I tasted blood. There was pressure in my chest, a crushing weight that made every breath feel borrowed. My left leg burned like it was on fire, while my right arm felt strangely absent, as if it no longer belonged to me. Sirens wailed somewhere far away. Someone was shouting my name, though it took me a moment to realize it was a stranger reading my license. At the hospital, time dissolved into bright lights and clipped voices. Internal bleeding. Multiple fractures. She's elderly, high risk. I caught fragments the way you catch leaves in the wind, not enough to understand, but enough to be afraid. They cut my clothes away. They slid needles into my veins. A young nurse squeezed my hand and told me to stay awake, her eyes soft with concern. "Do you have family?" she asked. "My son," I whispered. "Daniel," they called him. I watched the clock. The second hand crawled. When Daniel finally arrived, he didn't run. He walked in briskly, phone still in his hand, jacket unzipped, irritation written plainly across his face. Melissa followed behind him, heels clicking sharply against the tile, lips pressed tight as if she were already inconvenienced by the smell of antiseptic. "Mom," Daniel said, glancing at the monitors before looking back at me. "What happened?" "I was on my way to you," I said. My voice sounded thin, unfamiliar. "For Thanksgiving." Melissa sighed. Not quietly. The doctor came in soon after, a calm man with tired eyes. He explained that I had a ruptured spleen and internal bleeding. Surgery was necessary. Urgent. Without it, the risk was significant. "She'll need consent," the doctor said. "She's conscious, but given the trauma, we prefer next of kin to be involved." Daniel nodded absently. "What's the recovery time?" "Several weeks. Possibly longer." Melissa crossed her arms. "Weeks. Daniel, you have that conference in December. And the kids." The doctor cleared his throat. "Right now, the priority is saving her life." Saving my life. I looked at my son then, really looked at him. He was 45, broad-shouldered, confident. A man I had once rocked to sleep through fevers and nightmares. A man whose lunches I packed, whose college tuition I paid by taking extra shifts at the library, shelving books until my feet ached. He didn't meet my eyes. "What are the risks?" Daniel asked. The doctor was honest. At her age, surgery carries risk. But without it, I can't promise she'll survive the night. Silence settled over the room. I waited for my son to take my hand. To say, "Do whatever you need to do." To say, "She's my mother." Instead, he exhaled slowly and said, "Is there an alternative? Maybe medication? Monitoring?" The doctor's expression hardened slightly. "This isn't something we can wait on." Melissa leaned closer to Daniel and whispered, not quietly enough, not kindly enough, "You know what the insurance situation is. And her will. We don't even know what's in it." That was the moment something inside me cracked. I was lying there, broken and bleeding, listening to my own life being weighed against inconvenience and paperwork. Against holiday plans. Against money. "I'm right here," I said. It came out stronger than I expected. "I can hear you." Daniel flinched. For a split second, guilt flickered across his face. Then it vanished, replaced by something colder. Calculation. "Mom," he said carefully, "the surgery is risky. We just want to be sure it's what you'd want." What I'd want. I wanted to live. I wanted to see another spring, feel sunlight on my kitchen table, hear my grandchildren laugh without wondering if I was a burden. I wanted my son to choose me without hesitation. "I trust the doctors," I said. "Please." The doctor nodded. "We need a decision now." Daniel hesitated. That hesitation stretched longer than it should have. Long enough for fear to settle deep in my chest. Long enough for me to understand with aching clarity that if the choice were easy, if I were young or useful or convenient, there would be no pause at all. Finally, Daniel said, I don't think we should rush into surgery." The room felt suddenly very quiet. The doctor stared at him. "Sir, delaying could be fatal." Melissa touched Daniel's arm. "Let's think rationally. She's had a full life." A full life. I turned my head toward the window, because if I looked at them any longer, I might beg. And I had already learned, in that single unbearable moment, that begging would change nothing. The doctor looked at me then. "Mrs. Harper," he said gently, "this is your decision. If you consent, we will proceed." Daniel opened his mouth, perhaps to argue, perhaps to persuade. I didn't give him the chance. "Yes," I said. "I consent." There was relief in the doctor's eyes. He moved quickly after that, issuing orders, ushering people out. Daniel lingered by the door, looking unsettled, as if events had slipped out of his control. "Mom," he said softer now, "we'll talk later." I nodded, though I wasn't sure there would be a later. As they wheeled me toward surgery, the ceiling lights passed overhead like a slow procession of stars. My body shook, not just from pain, but from something deeper. A quiet understanding settling into place. I had been hurt on the road, yes. But the deeper injury had come in that hospital room. And as the anesthesia crept in, heavy and warm, one clear thought stayed with me. If my life could be dismissed so easily, then perhaps everything I owned deserved a second look. I woke to the sound of beeping. Slow. Steady. A mechanical reassurance that my heart had decided, at least for now, to keep going without asking anyone's permission. My mouth was dry, my throat raw, and my body felt as though it had been rearranged by strangers in the dark. Pain pulsed through me in waves, dull and deep, especially along my left side where the surgery had carved its careful path. For a long moment, I didn't know where I was. Then the memory returned, not all at once, but in pieces. The crash. The hospital lights. Daniel's hesitation. Melissa's whisper. A full life. I opened my eyes. The room was pale and quiet, washed in early afternoon light. A nurse noticed the movement and came quickly, her face breaking into a relieved smile. "Welcome back, Mrs. Harper," she said. "Surgery went well. You're very lucky." Lucky. That word followed me through the next hours like an echo. Lucky to survive. Lucky to be alive. Lucky, apparently, not to have died at an inconvenient time. I drifted in and out of sleep. Each time I woke, I listened for familiar footsteps. Each time, there were none. When Daniel finally came, it was nearly evening. I knew it was him before I opened my eyes. Children carry a certain weight into a room, no matter how old they get. He stood near the foot of the bed, hands in his pockets, rocking slightly on his heels as if unsure where to put himself. "Hey, Mom," he said. That was it. No apology. No relief. No trembling gratitude that could have been mistaken for love. "You're awake," he added, as if that were a minor surprise. Yes, I said. I am. He nodded, looked at the machines again, avoided my eyes. I waited for him to say something. I was scared, or I'm glad you're okay. But what came instead felt rehearsed. The doctor says recovery might take a while, he said. Rehab, physical therapy. We'll have to figure out what to do. I had learned by then that we usually meant me, eventually on my own. Melissa didn't come? I asked. She's home with the kids, he replied quickly. Thanksgiving was, well, you know. I did know. Thanksgiving had been cancelled. Not because I nearly died, but because it was inconvenient to wait. I'll be here for a bit, Daniel said, glancing at his watch. But I can't stay long. I've got some calls to make. He sat, scrolled on his phone, answered a message and smiled faintly at something on the screen. I lay there, stitched and sore, watching my son live his life just inches from me, entirely untouched by the fact that I had almost lost mine. When he left, he kissed my forehead out of habit. The kind of kiss you give out of obligation, not fear. The door clicked shut behind him. The silence that followed was louder than the crash had been. Days passed. The hospital had its own rhythm, medication, meals, physical therapy that left me trembling and exhausted. Nurses came and went, kind and efficient. They adjusted pillows, brought ice chips, listened patiently when I needed to talk. One of them, a woman named Carla, stayed an extra few minutes each night just to make sure I was comfortable. Your family should be proud of how strong you are, she said once. I smiled politely and said nothing. Daniel visited once a day. Always briefly. Always with an excuse ready. Work. Traffic. The kids. Melissa never came. Not once. No flowers. No card. No knitted scarf returned or even mentioned. One afternoon, I overheard a conversation outside my room. Two nurses speaking in hushed tones. Her son hasn't signed the post-op care plan yet, one said. Really? She'll need assistance after discharge. I know. Social services might have to get involved. I closed my eyes. That night, as rain tapped softly against the window, I felt something shift inside me. It wasn't anger. Anger is loud, demanding, desperate to be heard. This was quieter. It was the slow, steady realization that I had mistaken obligation for love for far too long. I thought back to all the times I had stepped in without being asked. Babysitting at a moment's notice. Writing checks I could barely afford. Swallowing sharp words when Melissa spoke to me like a guest instead of family. I had told myself it was sacrifice. That this was what mothers did. Lying there alone, I finally saw it for what it was. I had been convenient. And now that I wasn't, I was optional. A social worker came the next day, clipboard in hand, voice gentle but practical. She talked about rehabilitation centers, home care, assisted living. Words that felt heavy, final. Do you have someone who can stay with you? She asked. I pictured Daniel's face. The hesitation. The watch checking. The way he had asked about risks before he asked about me. No, I said. I don't. She nodded, making notes. We'll make arrangements, then. After she left, I stared at the ceiling for a long time. I thought about the house I lived in, the one I had paid off years ago. The savings account Harold and I had built carefully, dollar by dollar. The life insurance policy. The will I had written a decade earlier, neat and simple. Everything to Daniel. Because that's what mothers did. I laughed then. Softly. Bitterly. The sound surprised even me. In the quiet of that hospital room, stitched together by strangers and sustained by machines, I understood something with perfect clarity. My son had already made his choice. And now so would I. Not out of spite. Not out of rage. But out of respect. For myself. I reached for the call button and asked the nurse for a pen and paper. There were things that needed reconsidering. Rehabilitation began 2 days later. They moved me from the hospital to a long-term care wing that smelled faintly of disinfectant and brewed coffee. The halls were wider there, slower somehow, filled with people learning, again or for the first time, how to stand, how to walk, how to trust their bodies. I was no different. Each step felt like a negotiation between pain and pride. Daniel helped sign me in. He stayed just long enough to complete the paperwork, his signature sharp and hurried at the bottom of each page. When the nurse asked if he would be the primary contact, he hesitated, just for a moment, before writing his number down. "I'll do my best," he said, already stepping back. "But my schedule's pretty tight." Of course it was. Rehab was humbling. I learned how quickly independence can slip away, and how fiercely it can be rebuilt when someone finally decides they're worth the effort. My physical therapist, a broad-shouldered man named Luis, spoke to me like I was capable, not fragile. "Pain doesn't mean stop," he said gently. "It means adjust." Every day, I adjusted. My expectations. My understanding of who would show up for me. My sense of what I owed, and to whom. Daniel's visits grew less frequent. Sometimes he cancelled altogether. Melissa never called. Not once. On Thanksgiving Day itself, I sat at a small table in the common room, a paper plate in front of me, turkey sliced thin and lukewarm. Across from me sat a woman named Eleanor. She had no family at all. Her husband had died years earlier. Her children, she told me calmly, had decided distance was easier than duty. "They send postcards sometimes," she said, shrugging. "That's something, I suppose." I realized then that loneliness wears many disguises. Some come with cards and phone calls. Some come with silence. That afternoon, a volunteer stopped by with extra dessert. Pumpkin pie, still warm. She smiled and asked if anyone wanted seconds. When she placed the plate in front of me, her hand brushed mine. "Happy Thanksgiving," she said, as if it mattered. And somehow it did. The next morning, I asked to speak to a lawyer. The facility had one who visited weekly, mostly to help residents with advance directives and estate planning. His name was Mr. Feldman. He was younger than I expected, with kind eyes and the patience of someone who listened more than he spoke. We met in a small room with a round table and a window that looked out over the parking lot. "I'd like to update my will," I told him. He nodded. "That's not uncommon after a health scare." "This wasn't a scare," I said. "It was a revelation." He waited. I explained, carefully, calmly. I didn't dramatize it. I didn't need to. Facts have their own weight. I told him about the accident, the surgery, the hesitation, the absence, the way decisions had been made around me instead of for me. "Your son is your sole beneficiary now?" he asked. "Yes. And you wish to change that?" "I do." He didn't raise an eyebrow. He didn't judge. He simply opened a folder and slid a clean sheet of paper toward me. "Let's talk about what you want," he said. What I wanted. The question felt strange at first, like trying on a coat that hadn't belonged to me before. For decades, my wants had been folded neatly behind everyone else's needs. I thought about the house, the savings, the insurance, the objects that carried memory, Harold's watch, my mother's china, the photo albums no one ever asked for. "I want my estate to go to someone who showed up," I said slowly. "Not because they had to. Because they chose to." He nodded once. "That's very clear." We talked through options. Charities. Trusts. Individuals. I listened, asked questions, took my time. For the first time in weeks, I felt steady, grounded, in control. There was one name that kept returning to me. Carla. The nurse who had stayed late. Who had tucked blankets around my shoulders. Who had listened when I spoke about Harold, about the house, about the way the world narrows when you're no longer useful to the people you raised. "She reminds me of myself," I said quietly. "Before I learned to disappear." Mr. Feldman was careful. "You can include non-family beneficiaries," Yes. But I'll want to ensure everything is properly documented to avoid disputes. Do that, I said. Be thorough. When Daniel called that evening, I told him about rehab progress, about physical therapy, about nothing that truly mattered. He didn't ask about my will. He didn't ask what I needed. He told me about a promotion he might get in January. I'm proud of you, I said automatically. The words tasted old. After we hung up, I signed the first draft of my revised estate plan. My hand shook a little, not from fear, but from the weight of finality. This wasn't revenge. It was alignment. I was simply placing my life's work where it would be honored. And for the first time since the accident, I slept without pain medication, my mind quiet, my resolve complete. There was still one more step left. And it would change everything. I was discharged in early January. Winter had settled in by then, soft and grey, the kind that asks you to slow down whether you want to or not. I returned to my house with a walker and a box of medications, but also with something I hadn't brought with me when I left for Thanksgiving. Clarity. A home care aide came by 3 mornings a week. On the days she didn't, Carla did. She never said she would. She simply showed up, sometimes with groceries, sometimes just to sit at the kitchen table while I drank my tea and watched the light shift across the floor. She never rushed me, never checked her watch, never reminded me that her time was valuable. She treated my time like it was. Daniel visited once in those first weeks. He stood in the doorway, eyes scanning the house as if measuring it for changes. You're doing okay, he said, surprised. I am, I replied. He nodded, relief flickering across his face. Not relief for me, but for himself. There was nothing more he needed to do. He didn't ask about Carla. He didn't notice the new legal folders on the desk. He left after 20 minutes, promising to check in more. He didn't. Spring came quietly. My strength returned in small victories. One day without the walker. Another without pain medication. A morning spent in the garden, dirt under my fingernails, the smell of earth reminding me that life continues whether we are ready or not. That was when I finalized everything. Mr. Feldman came to the house with 2 witnesses. We sat at the dining table Harold had refinished himself, years ago. I signed each page carefully, deliberately. My estate was divided cleanly and lawfully. The house and savings went to Carla, placed in a trust with instructions she hadn't yet seen. Several meaningful items went to Eleanor and a local rehabilitation fund. Daniel received what the law required. Nothing more, nothing hidden, nothing that could be challenged. When Mr. Feldman left, the house felt lighter. I lived another 8 good years. Not extraordinary ones. Peaceful ones. I watched my grandchildren grow from a distance. Birthday cards arrived late, if at all. Daniel called on holidays. Sometimes. Our conversations were polite, shallow, safe. Carla became family. She sat with me through quiet afternoons and loud laughter. She knew where I kept the good dishes and which songs made me cry. When my hands grew unsteady, she steadied them. When my memory faltered, she waited. When my time came, it was gentle. No machines screaming. No whispered calculations. Just a warm room, a familiar voice, and the deep knowing that I had not wasted my final chapter trying to earn love from people who had already decided its price. The will was read a week later. I wasn't there, of course. But I know how it went. Daniel expected routine. Inheritance as habit. Security as reward. Instead, he found boundaries. Final ones. There were questions. Raised voices. Accusations. Melissa cried. My grandchildren were confused. Lawyers explained. Papers were signed. The law stood firm. Daniel asked once, through Mr. Feldman, if I had been angry. No, I told him in the letter I'd left behind. I was awake. Carla never celebrated. She cried instead. Said she wished she could give it all back just to have me there. That is how I knew I had chosen correctly. If there is anything my story offers, it is this. Love is not proven by blood. And dignity is not something you leave behind with age. Sometimes, the most powerful thing a woman can do is decide where her life truly belongs. If this story resonated with you, take a quiet moment today to ask yourself one simple question. Who shows up for you when it truly matters? And if you know someone who needs to hear this, pass it on.